Hey everybody, welcome to Purpose People. Today we've got a friend of a friend coming, and he's come to just share a little bit about his journey as an author. So welcome, Ross. Thanks for coming on Purpose People.
Thank you for having me, and I blame Nathan for bringing me on here. But yes, no, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to come and do this, and I've seen some of the show already, and what you guys talk about is absolutely brilliant. So I'm glad to be a part of it.
Yeah, so I mean, being an author is not necessarily, some people fall into it. Some people have always had that desire. How did you end up becoming an author?
Well, I think like a lot of people, COVID struck.
Okay.
And I've always written as a child. I used to play with my toys for hours on end. So making up my own kind of worlds and storylines and plots and things like that. And then as I got older, I used to write short stories, and I enjoyed making people squirm with them. Like I used to write the most vilest short stories you'd ever read just to get a reaction, because I thought that was quite cool in my youth. I was like, I'm making people squirm and feel a bit unhappy. And then I kind of just did that for a long, long time. And then I met my wife and got married, became a Christian.
Yeah.
And she had read some of my stuff and was just like, this is really dark. Like, I can see you've got talent, but she was like, this is not good for anyone. So then I stopped writing for about, I want to say 7 years. Like I just stopped. Like I had notebooks and I used to write bits in because I was brought up with kind of parents that didn't have a filter.
Okay.
So I used to watch whatever and like watch horror films and all this stuff, and came quite desensitized to it all. So it was a matter of kind of changing my mind in a way of kind of how I wrote and what I do. I still write horror. Yeah. But I write it with a kind of Christian emphasis, if you read the Bible, you know, it's full of horror stories, but yeah, so I kind of write with lots of kind of scripture in there, characters that are flawed, like faith is discussed quite a lot throughout it. It's not like a preach, like anyone could pick them up, but yeah, that's kind of my thing. But yeah, and then COVID struck and I was like, oh, what do I do? Like I've only written short stories and I work in a homeless day center. Yeah. That's what I do during the week. And then COVID struck and it was like, oh, I've got so much time on my hands because we could only open a certain amount of hours in the beginning.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
So then I started kicking around an idea about this kind of weird American town. And I don't know why I said it in America, because it's really difficult writing American when you're not. But so I set it up, wrote that one, and it was like a novella. So it's about 40,000 words. That was called Juniper. And I really enjoyed it. And it was the first time I'd written anything quite long. So I was like, okay, really enjoyed that. And then I jumped into just writing a novel straight afterwards, like the sequel to that book, which then went on to be nominated for a Bram Stoker Award, which is huge in the kind of industry that we're in for horror. It's like the biggest horror award. So that was nominated for that. And then since then, I've just kept on writing and kept on doing it. And like the writing time I have is my kind of almost like my time with God as well. So it's my quiet time, my peaceful time. And like when I sit down to write, I like,
it's definitely, you say it makes people squirm. I think it must make a lot of Christians squirm just hearing you say, I'm a Christian writer that's writing horror, and just that sense of, how the heck does that work?
Yeah, it clears a room at a church quite quickly when people don't know me and they say, what do you do? I'm a horror writer. And they're like, oh, okay. And you're in here?
Yeah.
But to be honest, like my wife will probably tell me off, but like I don't really care what people think. Yeah. All I care about is what God thinks of me and what I'm doing. And if people are not going to like me because I write horror, then they can go somewhere else. Like I'm not going to shy away from the fact that I write horror. Yeah. I think that God calls us into all different areas of society. And being a light in that place, which is predominantly dark and quite terrifying, is where I'm called to be. And and I've had amazing opportunities because I'm not hiding the fact I'm a Christian. Like people in the community know I am. And I've had amazing times when I've reached out to people and just said, is there anything I can pray for you about? Like, not, they knew I'm a Christian, but I don't know if they are or not. And then they've come back and been like, oh, I'm really struggling with this. Like, could you pray for that? And I'm like, yeah, I'll pray for that. It's not a problem. And then just praying for people, praying for writers that I know, like, and it's strange because I haven't, made this thing, but being a Christian in that field and being open about it, I've discovered there are other writers that I didn't even know were Christian.
You've come out Christian and said,
and been like, oh, yeah, thanks for praying for me. I'll pray for you. And then conversations started, and like somewhat, one of them's like parents were missionaries in another country, and he lived like away all the time, came back, and it's just conversations and things like that. But yeah, I do get some funny looks at church when people find out, and especially in my home group. People they're very supportive. They know what I do, and then but there's times where I'm just like, they're like, what do you write? I'm like, oh, I write horror. Oh, okay. I was like, you wouldn't like it. But yeah, there's nothing. I never write anything blasphemous. There's hardly anything I kind of like. So how do you, because that's the wider question is, how dark do you go now coming from a place of faith, if you like, because some people would say if you come from the place of, let's say you're writing horror, we know there's horrible stuff that goes on in the world, and then you can cross over almost to dark arts, magic, that sort of stuff, getting into demonology and that. Is it like, how far does that go? Is it more boo out of a cupboard and makes you jump, or is it a little darker than that? Because that's ultimately where on the scale is it? I would say it's quite high on the scale.
Right, okay.
So for instance, I also cover quite a lot of topics in my writing, which I feel need to be expressed. So like things I find abhorrent that kind of haven't been tackled in the kind of Christian circles and things like that. So like one of my books deals with domestic violence. Yeah. And it's normally human monsters. There's no like ghouls or goblins or wizards and things like that. It is all just
human
behavior. And so like, one of them, so my Juniper books, so that's a trilogy of books. So the first one deals with domestic violence and loneliness. And the second book, Tome, holds no bars. That was nominated for the Stoker Award. But that deals with racism in America. And those books in particular hold no bars. And what I did when I was writing them, when I wrote them, I then sent them out to sensitivity readers. Yeah. So obviously the second book deals a lot with racism, as you can see. And for the people that are listening, I'm a white man. Yeah, of course. So writing that was really kind of challenging because I didn't want to pull any punches. But I wanted it to be as real as possible. Yeah. So I got some sensitivity readers, sent it out to them. They all read it, came back, and some of the comments were like, "This is brilliant. Like, I love the way you haven't hidden the fact this happens." They said, and the word choices you've used, they're what people use to call us. So that is, and it's written so none of that kind of racism comes across from me writing the story. It's the characters within that. So, and then another one of my books, Only the Stains Remain, that deals with child abuse and parental neglect, which recently is, my publisher contacted me the other day to say that it's been out for about 2 years, but this year, the last 2 months, they've sold like hundreds of copies of it. So I don't know, something's probably happened online that's brought more attention to it.
Yeah, I mean, Twitter's a strange place, right? And a lot of stuff is breaking on Twitter about certain, lifestyles and stuff like that of the rich and famous and the elites and all that. And I mean, you can go down a rabbit hole with it, but there is evidence to suggest a lot of stuff has been going on for years. And so I think there is not necessarily a craving of it, but I think it's in the conversation now, and people that have been abused are willing to talk about it now, or will certainly get therapy for it and then talk about it anyway. Because I think it was a thing many years ago where you just suffer in silence for years and years and years, and either people just mysteriously check out of life or end up with mental health problems and stuff like that. And I think some of the stuff is now you being able to talk about it and finding people to talk about it with. But I like the fact that you said that, it's human horror, because I think sometimes we make horror being a monster or an alien, where actually the real horror is people closest to you or people you wouldn't expect it of. So we talk about child abuse and we talk about that's gone on in the church, for example. You wouldn't expect that of a priest or a pastor, and now stories are eking out that that's actually happened. That's a human horror because you didn't expect it.
Yeah, and when I wrote that book, because only the Saint Germain that deals with the child abuse, because I've worked in I've had many different hats. I've worked in local authority, worked for children and family centres. I currently work for a homeless charity. Like all of those areas that I've worked in, I've had to deal with kind of historic child abuse claims, other abuse claims. So when I wrote it, I had the knowledge of kind of sitting in on meetings where people have disclosed stuff, and not that I have taken anything of theirs and put it in the book, but like just how much it cuts and how much it affects in the long term. So this book, that book deals with kind of a two brothers, and it tells their story of kind of their childhood and how they were abused. And then later on in life, there's one brother who's kind of trying to get revenge or seek retribution for what happened against the people that did it. I wrote it and I sent it out, and I sent out a few copies to early kind of reviewers, and one of them read it, came back to me like within a couple of days. They said, as soon as I saw it was you, I opened it up and I was like, I had to read it. So I was like, okay. And she said, and I just wanted to message you and just say thank you. And I was like, oh, okay. And then had the conversation, and she said, for the first time in my life, I feel like I've been seen. And I was just like,
wow.
Oh, wow. Okay. And then we had a conversation, and she spoke about that she'd suffered similar type of abuse, and didn't know what to do with it as a child, and has carried that as an adult. And then this book kind of made it, for her, was like this really kind of cathartic thing. Like she was able to channel some of the things that she's been carrying around through the book and through the characters that have kind of progressed in the book to get their retribution. But yeah, and it's really powerful. And like, if I write a book and one person picks it up and is like, yes, that for me, I could just sell that one book and I'll be happy. Like it's life-changing. One of the other books I wrote called Tethered, I don't really talk about it because it's quite a personal book. I wrote that about growing up in, like, it's basically my life story, but it's a bit fictionalized. But all the stories that happen in it are true. And it was that I grew up with quite a toxic masculinity role model in my dad. Like it was like, you never cry. Okay. You go out to work, you do all of this, you don't talk about your feelings. And then, so I wrote kind of, it's called a novella in Flash. It's like little short stories, but they each add up to make a bigger story once you read it all the way through. Yeah. And that is, I get every now and then someone reaches out and says, oh, I picked this up and it's one of the most important books I've ever read. And I'm like, oh, wow. Okay. Like for me, like it's really weird. Like, I'm very British as well, because I'm just like, people say all these nice things and I'm just like, oh, okay. Yeah. I don't know how to like take it.
But it's interesting because the subject matter you're talking about, the only place you could put it really is in horror. It's not necessarily self-help, is it? Or it's not uplifting, or, if you look at the categorizing, so you're walking around, let's say Waterstones, this sort of human horror stuff you're talking about can only really live in horror. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? But when you hear, oh, it's a Christian rights horror, immediately you just, your preconceptions of what that looks like, you're already like, straight away. But now, having spent just literally 10 minutes with you talking it out, you're like, now you can start to see how the things come together. You're, oh, okay. So it kind of makes sense. Yeah. But it's an interesting one. Interesting genre.
I think horror gets a bad rap because I think lots of people see it and they're like, oh, it's horror. That's like, all Stephen King and like, it's all about vampires and all this. There is a lot of that.
Yeah, 100%.
But there is so many like great books out there, like Laurel Hightower's Crossroads. Like that's a kind of indie book, and she's a phenomenal writer, but that deals heavily with grief and it's grief of a mother who's lost, it's not a spoiler because it's on the back cover, but basically she loses her son when he's 22. Mm-hmm. And I had a conversation about this on a podcast recently, and we were talking about how grief affects you, and it was quite a strange conversation because I was like, that would be devastating. And then we were talking about losing a child at birth, say, like one of my new books is about a couple that head to Pulpero because they lost their child. It was incompatible with life. But then reading Laurel's book, like it's 22 years that her son got to. So that's 22 years of memories and life. And then you think of it like that and you're like, actually, yeah, it must be awful to lose a child at any age, but then just thinking of that life that you've grown and entwined with, and they become like this whole human and with the whole life of their own.
Yeah.
To have it just gone in an instant, and it follows the mother and how she kind of can't let go of her son. And even just walking around her house, like she'll see like his old trainers at the back door, and she's like, oh, that's
another trigger, another memory.
Yeah, and it's just this constant thing. But that book is phenomenal, and I think only in horror can you kind of explore these kind of dark territories and things that we,
So what's the process? What's the process? Like you're writing a book. Do you spend a lot of time on research? Do you literally go and say your subject matter of like child abuse, for example? Do you spend a lot of time talking to victims? Do you talk to charities, or do you just pull on the stories of people that you know quite close to you?
I tend to. With the first book, with Juniper, I kind of just wrote that off the top of my head through conversations I've had and things like that with other people. But as I've gone on, I've realized that to be able to talk about the issues I'm talking about, I need to know about them in depth, because if you write something and it's not factual, or that's not how someone reacts when this happens, people are going to spot it and they're going to be like, come on. Right?
Yeah.
So now I spend a lot of time researching. So I'm currently writing a Western horror, if there's a thing.
Western Superman can be a horror if you get stuck in the mud, couldn't you? So
Western Super Nightmare. There we go.
There you go. It's a title.
So with the Western, for example, like I've contacted, like, it's set in Nebraska, so I've contacted the Nebraska Historical Society and said, right, I'm setting it in 1894. Give me all you got. And then they like sent me like maps and towns and settlements and pictures and all this kind of stuff. So I've spent months combing through it and working out the route which my character's
that's quite surely that's quite exciting.
It's really interesting. Yeah. I love Westerns. It's
You a gamer?
No. I haven't played a game since like Mario Brothers.
Oh, okay. No, because they're like Red Dead Redemption. There's a whole load of
my
stuff
friend's got that and he plays it all
yeah.
the time, and he's just like, this game's amazing. And I was like, oh yeah, I can't afford the expense. but yeah, and then like lots of like my new book, The Devil's Pocketbook, which came out a couple of weeks ago, that is set in Pulpero in Cornwall. And the best thing about that book is that I visited there with my wife like a couple of years after we got married, and like I set the place is in the cottage that we stayed in. So I had it all in my head. I knew exactly where everything was. I knew the landscape of it. And it's all set around the harbour side. And the only thing I've changed is the name of the pub, because I didn't know if they'd want me naming the pub in the book. But everything else is exactly as it was. And it's the easiest book I've ever written, because I knew I could see it. And like when a character's walking, I knew exactly what they were going to see. And whereas, as I said, like setting in America, it's like, ooh.
It's easy to say I'm going to write a book set in America, and then as you're writing it, it's like, I don't know enough about what I'm talking about.
In one of the books I put down a bit of roadkill at the side of the road. I think I said something like an armadillo. I can't remember what it was, some animal.
Yeah.
And then like a reviewer who I value and appreciate came back and was like, that animal's not indigenous in that area. And I was just like, oh, okay. I was like, what animal is? And it was like, I said something. I was like, well, I'll change it. But it's just things like that. And then like, all
it was a pet and it escaped
from the zoo. But yeah, and it's strange. Like, and the Americanisms, like tap is faucet and like all those kind of things. And like a boot is a trunk, and like, it's just minefield of
pants on pants.
Yeah. but yeah, it was strange. But
so in terms of like the amount of books that you done, so how many books have you now published as a result?
so since COVID, because I didn't release anything before then, I have published. I've published 11, I think.
Wow.
And I've written. Well, I'm writing my 14th now.
Wow.
So there's a couple that have written, but I'm just waiting. And there's
and
a
who
couple.
they published through?
So I started out. So the Juniper books I self-published.
Yeah.
Because I didn't have a clue what I was doing, so I was just like, let's rock and roll. Amazon KDP did it that way.
Yeah.
Which for me at the time I was like, it offers really good royalty rates. I know it's Amazon and people don't like Amazon.
Yeah.
But for someone like me who didn't know what he was doing, it was straightforward, easy as. And then the best thing about that is I keep all the royalties that come in. And then since then, I've been able to progress to different publishers. So I've used quite a few indie publishers. So Cemetery Gates Media, Domain Publishing, Darklit Press, and then a new book that's coming out, which I've got Nathan working on secret projects for that one, but that one's coming out with Clash Books. They're all state-based, so they're all overseas. And it's strange because I just sit in my little house in Bristol writing these stories, and then like Clash, I knew from lots of other books that have come out. They're very good. They're very literary, but they do horror as well. And I don't mind asking anybody for anything. So I just reached out to them and said, look, I love what you're doing. I was just wondering if you have like an open submission, because I've got a book that I really want you to read. Just let me know.
Yeah.
And then they came back to me and were like, I've been like dying to work with you. So yeah, send it over. And I was like, I don't even know. Like,
it's mad, isn't it?
Like,
it's
I don't
a small
know
world, yeah.
how, because in America, I'm much better received than here. I don't know why. More people.
Yeah, but, 350 million.
Yeah. But yeah, and like just being known by these publishers who I didn't even think they knew who I was is quite strange and weird. And yeah, so lots of them are through indie publishers. And then because they're indie presses, they struggle getting into bookstores or bookshops. Because I think in America, you have to go through certain distributors to be able to get into bookshops. But the last two books are The Devil's Pocket book, and then the book coming out with Clash, which is I Died Too, but They Haven't Buried Me Yet. Long title. That they're both kind of have got distribution, which is like another step up for me. So I've already seen like them in bookshops. Devil's Pocket book in bookshops and stuff like that. And for me, that is like just mental to think about. Like I was doing nothing back in like 2020 when COVID hit, and
now you're an author in multiple places all over the place.
Yeah, and it's
so what's the sort of like the end game then? Do you see yourself as potentially seeing some of those stories becoming movies or TV series or anything on that level? Or are you just content with where it's at and just keep churning out novels?
I have to say, like, I am very excited because I love film. So I'm very excited at the prospect of something turning into a film or TV show or something along the lines. But like for me, like it's taken me ages to find it, but like I've found kind of a purpose, and that is writing. And for me, like books have no expiry date. So like I can write books and leave like a canon of work that will just continue to be read. And a film would be amazing because I'm broke, but that'd be nice. But
script writing, isn't it? That's probably the next natural step.
Yeah, I've set myself a goal this year of writing 3 novels. So I'm on my second one already, and then attempting to do a screenplay of one of those. Just as I've never done it before, so I thought it'd be quite interesting.
So how long does it take you to write a book? And so what are they, 40,000 words, 80,000 words a book?
Yeah, so I normally, my first drafts come in at around about between 95 to 110K. then they get obviously edited down.
Who edits those? The publishers? Or
yeah.
you?
So before these publishers, it was something I had to either find and beg and borrow time off someone to do for free, because as I said, I don't have a lot of money. So like this stuff it is costly doing it all by yourself. And then, or I've, got royalties back in that I've then spent on the next book to get edited. But with the new books, they've got in-house editors, so they've edited them, which saves me a lot of time. And obviously it comes back and I have to check them all. But time and expense, it saves me. So then I can kind of like leave that, move on to the next project. I'm always writing, not always writing. Like I write on the Friday, because I don't work on a Friday. So that's my writing day, and I just sit and I'll just write what needs to come. So the length it takes. So, excuse me. I wrote I Died Too, but They Haven't Buried Me Yet with Josh Malerman. So he's the writer of Bird Box, which got made into the Netflix film.
You might be someone to ask about your script.
Yeah. I'm asking him a lot. So,
cool.
But yeah, so we were both chatting, and he said that like we become friends over a period of time. And then he said, "Oh, I've got a bit of time." He said, "How about you? Like, you doing anything at the minute?" I was like, "Well, I've got an idea for a book." He was like, "Okay, well, what about if we write our books at the same time and then send each other, when we get to 10K, send each other it, and then we can read it first and then like feedback." And initially I was like, "Yeah, that's a brilliant idea." And I was like, "Yeah, let's do it." And then I was like, "Oh no, like this is like a New York Times best-selling author reading my first draft." And I was just like, "What have I done?" So then like the doubts started to come in, and I was just like, no. You just write it, do your best, and then send it off. And it was one of the best creative, times of my short career. Like, it was phenomenal. Like I wrote every day, did 2,000 words every day during the week. So at the end of the working week, I'd have 10K, and then just like Saturday, I'd like just edit what I'd kind of written, sent it to him. So I wrote I Died Too, but They Haven't Buried Me Yet in 26 days.
Wow.
Whole novel done, written. The funny thing is, we spoke about the novel like months before, and I'd told him like how it went, what happened, and he completely forgot about it. So when he was reading it, it was like he was reading it for the first time, and I was almost expecting him to kind of know where it was going, but he didn't have a clue. And at the end of it, he was just like, "That's one of the best books I've read." And I was like,
"Wow,
thank you very much."
That's brilliant.
And it was also, he was like, the editing was really good, and I was like, "Oh, I did that myself." Like, I'm not an intellectual. Like, writing and spelling and punctuation and grammar, that's my editing. Like, I'm not good at it. I've never been good at it. But over time and doing these books and the amount that I write, I've got better and better at kind of knowing how it works and the flow and I'm still an appalling speller. But that's really helped and also if you want to be a better writer, you've got to just read all the time.
Yeah.
And that's how you kind of learn and kind of see errors in your own writing. But yeah, it's a bit off top, but anyway, quickest I've written one is 28 days. Usually it's about 2 to 3 months.
Yeah, I mean, like for instance, during lockdown, I wrote a book. Never thought I'd ever write a book. English teacher was not the most complimentary to my writing skills. Weirdly enough, before then, I wrote. Can you remember those fighting fantasy books? So I actually wrote one, like my own version at school. So it must have been about 14 years old, and I wrote the whole thing out. Stapled it together. It had turn to page this, whatever, and I wrote it and gave it to our English teacher.
Oh, that's amazing.
And because there was something about him that just inspired you. So you kind of like, when you find the right teacher, it just inspires you to do good stuff, right? Yeah. So I put in all this extra time, wrote this thing or whatever. Now, I gave it to him because he was leaving. I thought, oh, there's your leaving present. I don't know. And I'd even drawn the cover or whatever. And I gave it to him. So he might have just taken it and shredded it or whatever. Yeah. But I remember going through the process and really enjoying it. And then I just completely forgot about it. Got a new English teacher in the 4th year of school. And it's just generally speaking, she actually told my dad at a parents' evening that she hated men. So it's like, well, there we go. That's a really good start for my writing career. Yeah. And obviously then I started to write and I started to blog first and foremost, and then began to build up. And this, long story short, I managed to write a book. Someone gave me a formula on how to write it, which is great. And it was a business book, but I managed to write it in a way that I've never written before, but you could write it in manageable chunks. But my wife, who ended up editing it, she's an editor, she fed back and she said, it's like you've got the creativity of a writer. That's there. The way that you think, the way you process information. It's the technical aspects that you've seen you've got better at because you haven't had them. Because I weren't really taught them. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. So it's like, I've got better. So when you're talking about, punctuation, grammar, all that sort of stuff, I've had to work hard at it to try and, but it's like, the mistakes I make, I'm learning and getting better at. So I would say creatively, I think I'm quite natural. But technically, I have to work at it. Yeah,
I think it's like a muscle. You have to keep on using it, otherwise you just withers. But yeah, like one of the best bits of information I had, because I'm kind of like, I think it's a quote. I'm not sure who said it. It might have been Steinbeck or something. But it was, when you start writing a book, finish it, because otherwise you're always going to be telling someone you're writing a book instead of you wrote a book. So what I tend to do is, and I've got better, because what I tended to do was just write the book, not care about any of that editing kind of stuff, and then get to the end and be like, right, I've finished the book. And then I'd spend literally months going back through what I'd written, just because I was in not a rush to finish it, but I was like, I was writing a bit, knew it was wrong, and I'll fix that when I come back to it. And but now I've started to use what's called the Lansdale technique by Joe Lansdale, and which is, you write your day's words, and then before you sit down to write the next day, you go back over the words that you've written and then edit it as you go, and then you're already back in the story to then move on to the next part, and then you do the next part and you go back and do it again.
And what's great about that is it's like when you're watching like Netflix and you're watching box sets, you watch 2, don't watch it for 3 months. You have to put it on fast forward to remind yourself of what you've done. So it's quite good. Yeah, I like that. So.
But yeah, that's very helpful. But yeah, I like, my English teacher at school was awful. Like, she bullied me, and to this day, like, I am rubbish at reading out loud. And when I was at school, even if I've written it myself, I know the story, but when I was at school, I used to, go around the class reading out like Shakespeare or something, and like, I'd start reading and I'd stutter, and she'd be like, "Could you start again, please?" And then my stutter would just get worse and worse and worse, and then I was just like, I just gave up, and I didn't even read a book for pleasure until I met my wife, because she put me off reading so much, and like, I loved fighting fantasy. That was it. That was fighting fantasies and comics. That's what I read. Yeah, but anything else I didn't read, and then. Met my wife, and then she was kind of like, "Oh, try this book," and it was A Million Little Pieces by James Fry. It was about addiction and that kind of stuff, and I read it, and it just blew my mind. He's one of the writers I put down as being one of the fundamental building blocks for me to become a writer. Yeah, because in that book, and it's in all of his work, but his structure's really strange. Like, it doesn't look right, but it's engaging, and like, all the punctuation's all over the place. But if you get into it, it's just a compelling story, and it's just, teachers really mess you up.
It's sad. It's a sad story that, I went to school to learn, but in fact, my experience of learning was the thing that held me back from learning anymore. Yeah. The teachers put you off learning, and I think, whether they were having a bad day or a bad year or just in the wrong job, but there's a lot of creativity that's got lost because of it. And I think fortunately for me, because I'm in brand and in marketing and whatever, and I think it was just because of the lack of writers we had when we very first started. It's like, oh, look, I'll write what I kind of think it should be, and then hopefully Claire's got all the technical ability to bring it back. And I think, it was where I think the relationship, because Claire now can take what I write and she just go, you mean this, don't you? She just reorder it and structure it. And now as I'm writing it, I know how she's going to correct it. So it's getting, it's got easier and easier over the years.
Wives are very good at that. Because I remember giving Anna, my wife, I gave her like tome, like the finished copy. Like I was just about to like push publish. Gave it to her and she proofread it and she loved it. And one of the comments she said though was, like she highlighted some areas that I needed to take out. And I was like, oh, okay. And she said, because you get us there, and this is the old Ross creeping back in. She was like, you get us there, and then you just push our face in it a bit more. And I was like, right, okay. Since we had that conversation, that is something that I've implemented in every book. So I've known where the point is to stop and like rein back. Like I don't need to do a bit more gore because it's gory enough, or Yeah, she's brilliant. Like, she's very helpful.
No, but and I think that's the thing is that it's there are people out there that are even fearful to put pen to paper because of their experience at school, or type something or write a blog because they've had that experience. And I think it was just having the right people around me to just encourage me and just say, just do it. You need to do it. And I think, even if it's just to process your own thoughts, I think writing as a discipline is really cathartic. And I think, I used to hate writing reports, certainly some of the businesses I was involved with. But I got into the fact that it was actually quite good to write a report because you could reflect on where you had come from and how far you had traveled. And one of the things as an entrepreneur that I've always struggled with is to focus on wins. I just like on to the next thing. It's not, I'm just like, yep, great. I'm on to the next thing because I'm thinking of the much bigger picture of the journey, and I won't celebrate. And what report writing does, or when you're writing blogs or when you're writing reviews, is it gets you to reflect. And I think that's one of the things I found about writing it. Even blogs, it's the ability to reflect on life and process life. And so it's not how do I put it? It's not the printing of the book and selling it. That's not what you do it for in a way. It's the process that you're going through in the relationship with the characters in the book, which make it worth it for me. It's quite a weird one. It's not, when it was printed and I've got my book and, it was like, it was nice, but it was just the process of writing. And at times, it felt like a slog and whatever. But having done it and having gone through it, I enjoy it. And actually, I used to hate writing blogs. It's like, well, someone's got to do it. But it can be like when you're busy, but it forces you to be in the present and reflect and piece something together.
Yeah, I think that's something
discipline
that people who don't write think that's really weird. Like, surely the end result of the book is the thing that you want. Yeah. But when you're in it and you're in the zone and you've created all these characters and you're living the life and living there, like there's nothing better, to just create something out of nothing. And then it's like, I've lived that life, and then I now can move on to the next life and do that. And
but in its core state, it's just letters on a page.
Yeah.
And it's like art, isn't it? Art is just marks on a piece of paper, but it's putting them in down and leaving that impression that it takes you on this journey. It fuels your imagination, and you can process some of the stuff in, as you said, like in normal life, you can process life on the page, on doing things. So for me, the actual process of writing is as a writer or enjoying writing is absolute paramount. I think you not to lose sight of that, because I think that's the other nervousness where people go, "Oh, if I'm published, I'm now like a slave, and I have to write all these words."
It's odd because like I've never had to publish or write to a deadline, and there was a publisher that was interested in re-releasing all my Juniper books. And they'd reached out, signed contracts, and at that point hadn't published a third book, and I was going to leave it a couple of years before I wrote it. But part of the deal was, we'll take these 2 books that are already out, but part of the deal was we want this book ready by next year. And it's annoying, but the deal fell through, but I'm glad it did, because it afforded me more time to just, because I was rushing it and I wasn't feeling the book at the point when because I was writing it and I was like, right, okay, well, they need it by September. So that means I've got to write this many words a day. And I've got to, where normally my writing kind of experience is it's just me, and I just write the books I want to write when I want to write them. And it was the first time I'd written to kind of a deadline, and I was just like, I enjoyed the experience, but I wouldn't like to do it again, which is quite odd. But if your publisher's out there, hit me up.
Yeah, but that's the thing. It's like an artist that then finally goes from starving artist to an artist getting paid to do the job. As much as the initial spark of getting paid is great, you got cash in the bank finally, it's like great. But then over a period of time, you go, I wish it was like the way it was before, from a creativity perspective, not a money perspective, eating soup every day and spaghetti hoops or whatever. But having the money's great, but having that process, and I think any writer, worth their salt, have got to come to that point where they just put the boundaries in place and said, look, this book's going to take 2 years, and if they're good enough, they just have to put up with it. You have to wait, but we're not all Stephen King yet or whatever. But I think it's that creative process, and is that, so when you put that deadline on you and it upsets the creative process, it's like, it's not you're just writing for writing's sake, and then it's just smashing stuff out. But sometimes it's good to have a deadline, or else it might take us forever to get it done. Yeah,
deadlines can always be extended, can't they?
So, Ross, in terms of a budding writer out there that's probably thinking about it or been sat on the fence, you had this big event, like most of us, called COVID, that kind of, you said, you know what, I'm going to do something about it. What sort of advice would you give someone that's sat on the fence now, maybe thinking, you know what, I've been putting this book off for a long while now? What would you say to them?
Write it.
Yeah.
Don't put off what you can do today. I think it's scary doing something you've never done before. But I believe everybody has got a good book in them.
Yeah.
Don't let kind of your intellect hold you back. Because I am not intellectual in the slightest, but I can sling a few words together and make coherent sentences. And that's what editors are for as well. Like, when I look back at my first draft of my first book, I'm just like, who wrote that? Like, and you only get better the more you do it. And write something. It doesn't mean you have to publish it, but you can at least be like, oh, I wrote this, and be something you're proud of. And I think for any budding writer out there, you need to read as much as you can, and in the kind of wheelhouse that you want to write in.
Yeah.
Read wide, and but if you like me, you're focusing on horror. Like I used to read loads of genres and science fiction and fantasy and all that kind of stuff, but I kind of, for me, it doesn't hold the same kind of passion as horror. But I don't do like werewolves and all that rubbish. I don't really like that. It's just not real. I don't find it scary. What I find scary is real people doing horrible things. Because that could happen. But yeah, and surround yourself with like-minded people. Get a few people that you trust not to blow smoke up your ass. That will tell you, it's not as good as you think it is. And,
that's helpful when your wife's an editor as well. She doesn't hold back.
Yeah.
That's a dagger to my creative heart. I'm never going to type that again.
Kill your darlings. But yeah, like it's and it can be a lonely experience writing, but if you surround yourself with the right people, and like I can't believe, like I chat regularly to like authors all over the world who didn't even know I was, like, in 2020, and
it's incredible.
But also like not being a dick. also goes a long way. Like, you know, like having relationships with people just because you want to get something out of it.
Yeah.
I've had loads of those, and it's just like at the start, it's like, oh yeah, that's cool. Yeah. And then it's like, oh, can you do that for me? And it's like, well, I thought, no. And it's just people kind of doing that. And, you know, there's some writers in this business that I kind of have come up with, and, you know, I say come up with because I'm only like a couple of years down the line, but like one in particular is like Eric LaRocca, who is doing amazing work. And like he came out around about the same time as me. So we like became friends because we were both new to it, and we were like asking each other advice and stuff. And like he got an amazing, like one of his books went viral on TikTok and it blew up, and sold like thousands of copies with this independent press, like literally thousands and thousands of copies. And then Titan Books came in and were like, oh, can we buy that book off of that press? And you know, we want to sign you for like 3-book deal. And like he's spoken about the fact that, you know, people that he thought were his friends have all now disappeared because he's now this author releasing books through Titan. And he's like, and I said to him, well, it's because people just want you to be in their bubble. Like seeing someone disappear and rise up, people get jealous.
I've said this, you know, like for me, I think most people said to you, you know, do you fear failure? And I said, no, I've never really felt failure because I've probably made loads of mistakes anyway over the journey. What I still fear or have learned to is success by what other people think. And I've got less worried about it now because I know it's such a blocker to do what you're supposed to do in life. And I think now it's like, well, I know what I'm doing, I'm supposed to be doing, and success will come as a result of it. It's not always easy. And what you see externally, you don't know what goes on behind the scenes. So I've had a lot of sympathy for successful people now because they've, you know, it's 10, 15, 20 years to become an overnight success. They've just stuck with it. You know, if you talk to anyone that's done well, it's just persistence. You know, they just kept doing it. And then one day it kind of got the audience it finally deserved, so to speak. But yeah, fear of success, I think, is quite a big thing. You know, it's like when the people that you thought really were your champions then rubbed up the wrong way by you, or you're a bit weird, or no, that's not fair.
And I think as well, like social media plays such a big part in it nowadays anyway. And like my wife, she teaches young girls at school about like body image and things like that. And like one of the things that she says, and when, you know, we've spoken to our children about it as well, is like, as soon as you open up the app on social media, you're opening yourself up to millions of people's opinions. And that sometimes is just too much for anyone. And like some of the vileness that comes out of that, like through just someone tweeting about their success, you've then got someone coming in being like, oh yeah, but this isn't good, and this is, oh, you're this and you're that. And it's just like, listen, let's take a breather.
Do you know what? You know, you do. I mean, you'll get people that you'll always get someone that doesn't like what you do, no matter how well-intentioned, how nice you are, whether you've done a talk, whether you share, even this podcast, we'll get people like going, oh, you know, or you just get it. That's the reality of it. But I think you've got to, someone said something to me the other day and it just really stuck. They said, when dealing with publicity, if you've got 50% of the audience for you, live with that. That's great. Don't worry about what the other 50%. And anyone that stands for something is always going to have their critics, or anyone that does something notable is always going to have people, you know, shooting from the gallery saying you can't do that. And I used this example a while ago. I said, if let's say President Obama, when he was spent all his time responding to negative comments, for example, he never got the job done or done whatever he thought came into office to do, you know, and each president after that. And it's the same now. It's like, try and focus on making an impact. And if you're doing that, you're going to get critics, but hopefully with well-intentioned people will do more good than bad, and leave it at that, you know. Because
there's when I was talking to Josh Malaman about kind of reviews, because I had a book come out and I was like, I'm a bit nervous about the reviews, you know, I'd see how it's going to do. And then like I think I was on a short list for the Stokers again for Only the Stains Remain this time, and then I didn't get through to the next round, so I was like, oh, okay, that's fine. And I was just a bit down because I was just like, I thought it was going to do well. And then like I got a couple of like snarky 1-star reviews after that, and it was just like, this guy's got no talent. Like, what have I just read? And I was feeling a bit down when I was chatting to him.
Oh no!
And he's like, look, he said, I don't read my reviews. He said, but tell you what, one of the best bits of advice I could give you, he said, is think about the best book you've ever read. Yeah. And I was like, right, okay. And he was like, all right, now go over to Goodreads and then go to 1-star reviews on the best book you've ever read, and then read what people think of that. And I was like, and actually it made me feel better.
Yeah.
Because it's different tastes and different people have different things. And I was listening to a podcast, and it was Margaret Atwood, and it was on Talking Scared, and she was talking about like books being like messages in a bottle.
Yeah.
And she's like, you throw those out, one will go somewhere, land ashore, someone will pick it up, and they won't get it because it's in a completely different language. They won't understand what you've written. It might go somewhere else, someone will pick it up, and half the book's missing, but the first half they really liked, but the second half, and she was like, it's just these different books just hit people differently. And what I write, not everyone is going to enjoy. Yeah. But luckily the majority of people do.
You wouldn't be still writing and have an audience, and there's a demand and stuff like that if you didn't know what you were doing. So Ross, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on. It's been an amazing conversation. One that I didn't expect which way it was going to go when Nathan introduced us. But yeah, really cool. Thanks so much for spending some time with us on the sofa.
No problem. Thank you very much.
Is there any way people can get hold of you? You got a website, you got social media or anything?
Yeah, I'm on social media. Also, if you just type my name into Google, I kind of just throw up all over the screen, so you can find me anywhere. I think
just tell it, what's your name? Just tell
it's Ross Jeffery _ and that's on Twitter.
Yeah.
And then I've got like a WordPress, but I'm sure I can leave you some details about it.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely fine. It's just, people might want to find it, or maybe reach out and say, look, I've got this. What do you think about it? But no, thanks so much. It's been really good.
Thanks for
really
having
appreciate it. Cheers. Hi, everybody. Thank you for listening to the Purpose People podcast. You can follow us online. You can like and subscribe to us on YouTube. You can follow us on Apple, Google, Amazon, and Spotify. And if you see any clips on our Reels, which is on Instagram or Facebook, or even on TikTok, please give it a like, please give it a share, and please tell your friends. We'd love for you to take part in a Purpose People questionnaire that is also through our website at Cre8ion.co.uk, and hopefully you can find yourself living a life on purpose.